Okay, well, I'm down here at Lower Reach Park. I've had my ice cream already. I had the Ben and Jerry's half baked. There it is. There. Um, yeah, there's a nice picture there. Yeah. Anyway, it's funny, along the same lines of the video I just made, I'll tell you another kind of a comical story. This is related to the stuff that happened that I talked about with being labeled and all that. Um, because I was having trouble with the teachers, with some of the teachers, not all of them. We had a lot of good teachers there, but there were a few that I was having trouble with anyway. And because I was also not fitting in very well at school, it was decided that the board psychologist should see me. She was a lady by the name of Mrs. Warren. Mrs. Warren drove a 1949 Plymouth sedan, and the thing burned oil. And so there was always a cloud of blue smoke that followed Mrs. Warren wherever she went. You could smell it in the air. Anyway, she would come to the classroom, and she'd come to the classroom, and she would ask for me and identify herself as the psychologist. That didn't do me any good, because now I was crazy. Now the other kids knew that I was crazy. I had to go see the head shrinker. So anyway, that didn't help matters any. It's funny how they actually bring on more of the thing that creates their concern. You're not getting on with the other kids. We better get them in to see the psychologist. That'll fix it. And then they bring the psychologist comes to the classroom and lets everybody know, so that I can be judged for another thing. Anyway, so that I can now have that they can use against me. But anyhow, this is what happened. I don't know. Sometimes smart people aren't very smart. That's all. But Mrs. Warren decided that I was such a serious problem, such a head case, that I was in such bad shape mentally that I needed to go to Ottawa and see a friend of hers who was a psychiatrist. He was a psychiatrist, and he was a fellow by the name of Dr. Harnshire. That was his name, Dr. Harnshire. And I had to go and see Dr. Harnshire. So we made a trip to Ottawa. We got into the 1962 Pontiac. We still had that car at the time. That was the last of that car. The car was on its way out, but we did still have it. We got into the 1962 Pontiac with 2 spare tires in the trunk, because my dad always said for a trip like that, we're going to need 2 spares. And he was generally right. We generally have a blowout going there and a blowout coming back. But anyway, we go up there, and we go into this great big building. I'd never seen the likes of it before. It's not like I was ever in the city or anything like that. It was an unusual thing for me. We didn't go to Ottawa. You didn't take a trip like that very lightly. You went on a trip like that if you really needed to. That was 50 miles of driving into the city. Most of our driving was just from where we lived into town and back, or maybe into the neighboring town. That was about it. 12-mile trip was kind of a big deal, to go from Perth to Smiths Falls. That was a big deal. Anyway, we go to Ottawa. We see Dr. Harnshire. Dr. Harnshire was a very tall, thin man. He had kind of scraggly-looking, dirty blonde hair, with a big bald spot on the top of his head, though. It kind of came down like a waterfall around the pool. The bald spot on top of the... Anyway, it was like an inverted pond with a waterfall, basically, if you can imagine. And he had a great big nose that was just cherry red, and he had a handkerchief in his pocket. He was always pulling the handkerchief out and blowing his nose and sneezing and everything. Anyway, he got me into his office with his desk there to talk to me. My parents were waiting in the waiting room. Now, I didn't know at the time what he was doing. I know now. But as a child, I didn't know. As a 6-year-old child, I had no idea. But what he was doing, we must have looked like the Beverly Hillbillies, I'll tell you, driving into Ottawa in that 62 Pontiac, We must have really looked the sight. But anyway, that just thought just crossed my mind, in 1974, Not that those cars were uncommon back then, but I mean, people weren't driving them great distances, and you didn't see very many cars like that in Ottawa. People tended to drive newer stuff in the city, But anyway, I didn't know what he was doing at the time, but as an adult, I know now. He opened up his desk drawer. Now, he had this desk, and the top of this desk was polished to the point. This was a wooden desk, great big wooden desk, but it was beautiful. It was polished up that it was just like a mirror. It was like glass, but it was wood. I remember that. I noticed that, and it impressed me because I had never seen anything like it. And it must have cost him a ton of money, that desk, Anyway, he opened up his desk drawer while he was talking to me, and he took a little brown envelope out like that, what we used to call a pay envelope, because a lot of jobs back then paid cash. Once a week, all the men on the job would get a little brown envelope with a roll of bills in it. The bills would be all folded up inside the envelope, and that was their pay. Well, he pulls out this little envelope, and he pulls out a metal straw. It was a shiny silver metal straw. And what does he do? He undoes the flap of the envelope, and he puts a line of a white powder on the beautiful desktop there. And then he puts the straw into his nostril like that, pinches the other nostril, and he snorts all this stuff up into his nose. Now I know what he was doing. I had no idea back then. You know what he was doing. I don't have to lay it out for you. You know what he was doing. Anyway, this is the guy that was supposed to be helping me because I was not right in my head, apparently. So, what a world we live in. Anyway, so he did that, talked to me for a little while, took me into another room where they had different games and things set up. He had me throw some bean bags into a wooden box with holes in it. There were holes. It was like a target thing. You'd throw the bean bags and try to get them into the holes and stuff. So he had me do a bit of that. I kind of enjoyed that, And then we went out and we talked to my parents. Well, he talked to my parents. I sat there and listened like I was supposed to. He told my parents, he said, well, really, I don't see anything wrong with the boy, but he needs to go on tranquilizers. Need to put him on tranquilizers. Well, to my parents' credit, and I won't say that I got a lot of protection from my parents, because I really didn't, but to my parents' credit, they saw through that, and they said, no, we're not putting him on tranquilizers, Dr. Harnshire said, well, I'm telling you that's what you need to do. Well, my dad, he said, no, we're not doing that. I'm putting the boy on tranquilizers. He's 6 years old. You want to put him on tranquilizers? Are you kidding? No, we're not going to do that. Anyway, the doctor, he said, well, then, Dr. Harnshire, he said, well, if you won't do what I want you to do, I'm afraid I can't help you. And my dad just said, well, yeah, I guess you can't, And we left. So that was that trip, But yeah, this is what we went through. And as I recall, we went up there fine. On the way home, we had a blown tire. My dad did have to change the tire on the way home. So we had a pretty good trip. We only used one of our two spares. So that was good anyway. But yeah, this is how it is anyway. But kind of a funny story anyway. I'm sure Dr. Harnshire would be long dead by now. He'd be probably middle aged back then. So, and that was 50 odd years ago. So, if he's still alive, he'd be around 100 years old now, or he'd be close to it. He'd be in his late 80s or early 90s anyway. But that's the story. Um, that's the story of Dr. Harnshire and his fancy desk and his little envelope and his straw and his white powder. Anyway, Dr. Harnshire's magic white powder. Sounds like an old patent medicine from the 1800s, you know. Dr. Harnshire's miracle powder, you know. Cure for all that ails you. Anyway, I'm lucky he didn't offer me a line, or maybe he'd have got me hooked on that stuff. Who knows? Anyway, that's it for now. Um, yeah, I saw so much stuff like that with people who were supposed to be smart when I was young. When I was young, you know, that, like I say, I didn't know what he was doing. It struck me funny, but I was 6 years old. I didn't know anything about cocaine and stuff like. I didn't know anything. I don't think you're even supposed to say that, because I noticed they blocked the word out. When anybody makes a video talking about these things, they always block that word out. But still, I don't think that, I know now what he was doing. At the time, I had no idea. But it does explain all the sneezing and the nose blowing and the big red nose anyway and stuff, you know. He's a pretty freaky looking fella. Anyway, that's it for now. We'll see you later.